Well, on all the movies of the Fantastic Factory, all the ones that went out under the Fantastic Factory label, as well as a lot of the ones around it. You know, there's a number of movies that didn't take the label, but all the ones of the label I personally developed. All of them I was very involved with the script. Sometimes I wrote drafts of the script. And with Arachnid, the script already existed by Mark Sevi, and it was brought in by Sherry Bryant. She was the person from that was sort of the production executive on The Dentist. That's where I met her, and she brought Arachnid to me, and then we chose Arachnid because I was working with the guy, one of the guys at Filmax named Adolfo Blanco, and I was trying to have a package that made sense. I wanted to sell different types. I didn't want to do 4 zombie movies. You know, I wanted that the Fantastic Factory would represent different types of movies. So then I looked at the 4 movies and I thought, well, Faust, that's really unique. It's kind of a comic book movie, but it's a bit different. And this is before really the digital effects got to the point where you could just do anything, you know. And then Beyond Reanimator, that's a classic sequel, horror.
Throughout history, man has searched for the secret to immortality.
She's not getting any fresher.
One doctor has found it.
It was a theory.
But is it worth it?
Awesome! Big green shit! Rocks dead! No!
Welcome to a world where death is just the beginning.
Okay, Dagon is a Lovecraft story, but it's really fish people. So it's kind of a monster movie. And then Arachnid is a giant insect. And so you need a monster, I think, too. And I think it made a good balance. So the Arachnid was, this is a very good genre to, for every market in the world, because every market has different problems with their cultural censorship and their political censorship. And so, for example, if you make any movie that I've made, almost every one in Germany has had 10 minutes cut out of it, because they just don't want the blood and violence. And no violence against women is acceptable. But you can have all the nudity you want. All the sex is okay. In the UK at that time, they had these video nasty things. So they're always cutting bits out of movies. In some countries, they don't. In Asia, you can't have any supernatural because their populations are already so spooked by the super ghosts and stuff. They don't want any ghost stories. Every culture has these kinds of censorships, but a giant insect is good for everybody because it's not religious, it's not supernatural, it's not, you know, it's not a person, it's just this big, cool looking monster. And it sells, everybody likes a giant, you know, a giant creature. I remember seeing Mothra when I was young and wow, it was so cool, it was so big, you know. And I think that all those kinds of movies really, you know, King Kong and, you know, you love these giant things, the Harryhausen stuff, you know, these things were wonderful. And so, especially Adolfo Blanco at Filmax, he was a big fan of all these creature movies, you know, like Jaws and Jurassic Park. And so you kind of go, well, we want one of those because that's a good mix. And this was a good one. The story held together, but, you know, I worked with Mark to do more with it. So, for example, all the little creatures along the way were not completely in the original script. You know, to start out with smaller ones because you've got to keep the audience interested before the big spider shows up. And then, you know, I think we added the village in. There was some stuff that was developed into it, but the basic story and the characters were there from the beginning.
For God's sake, let's go!
Step back now!
Stop!
Uszeszka!
Susanna, run!
Well, I tried a number of people. I mean, we were looking at a lot of people. I talked to a lot of people. It's not that it wasn't like we were offering and people were turning down and then we were offering again for any of these movies. It was mostly trying to find people who wanted to work with us. I know Stuart and Jeffrey, the people that I work with, they will maybe, they will be a bit trusting that, hey, come to Spain, because back then nobody would come, it was crazy to go to Spain, that it's not going to be a disaster, because I know them. Where it's harder when you're going through typical channels, and I know it's going to be difficult to work within a Spanish company and all this. So when you're looking for people, you look and look and look, and then see who's available and what actually comes together. And in this case, I know I talked to Robert Kurtzman about doing it. I thought he might be good. I thought about Toby Hooper. I thought about, and I don't know if Toby Hooper Arachnid would have been fine. I think I talked to him about that. I forget who else. I talked to, I was on the phone in Spain always with people in LA. But everybody's busy, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, and then I think The Hidden had done very well in Spain, and I think it was Julio's idea. He said, "Well, how about this movie, The Hidden? I think it won Sitges or something." And I said, "Well, I'll call Jack Shoulder." I didn't know him, but I called him, and he was I'd met him. Yeah, I met Jack Shoulder because he did the sequel to Wishmaster. He was available. And he was happy to give it a shot. And so it came about that way. The script was already there, and he was willing to go in. And then my big thing was to get Steve Johnson to do the creature. So we did that. And we actually shot a lot of it in Mexico for the jungle part. We went to Veracruz. And it's kind of a real traditional kind of guys against the alien spider movie. And once again, there's no digital effects. The digital effects that we have are just awful. But today, of course, I think we could have that thing running around a little better. I don't know if there's a secret to doing laughs and scares. I think it's something you either just have to feel. I know that with Reanimator, it was, Stuart already has this sensibility. He's really a funny guy. Stuart leans towards comedy. I think that with Reanimator, it wasn't so much trying to be funny, it's just that we were enjoying ourselves so much. And we did think things were funny. I think when we thought about, I was concerned that these heads are always balanced perfectly on the necks when they're cut off. And so I said, we got to do something about that. And so then the idea was to put it on a paper spike. Well, that becomes funny. For a horror fan, that's funny. The idea that Wes puts it on a stake, there's something ironic about it. So for a non-horror fan, maybe they just think it's gross. And it's like unnecessary, gory, horrible stuff. Well, to a horror fan, yeah, it is horrific, but it's funny. And when West says that, accuses Hill of being a plagiarist when he's killing him. Well, that's funny, but that's in the script, and it's in the directing, and it's in the acting. So I think once you get into that role, for me, Reanimator wasn't meant, I know Stuart never meant it to be funny. He meant it to be straight ahead scary, but I know that we were always laughing on the set. We were always, everything was always, every time we'd get something particular. I mean, even when West is like jamming the bone saw through the chest, I mean, it's really gory, but we thought it was hugely entertaining. It wasn't, I like to do horror that hurts to look at, but I'm always looking for the funny bit in it, because I guess I see that a movie like Reanimator or Return of the Living Dead or Evil Dead, I think those movies are like you know, theme park rides. It's like going on a roller coaster. You feel the adrenaline, you get the fear, but it's perfectly safe. And so you tend to laugh. You're screaming and laughing. And I think that type of horror movie goes there. And that's kind of what I like in horror. Now, you don't get that in The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or The Omen. Even The Shining you do a little. But I love those movies. I love The Exorcist. It doesn't have that humorous, that ironic part. But I know for me, I tend to naturally go there. I tend to naturally want the part that comes right after the horror. You know, I want the nauseous feeling, that creepy kind of goose flesh horror, but I want the funny part of it as well.
What's wrong, Lauren? Don't you like the new Mother Nature?
Arachnid, all of the movies had big theatrical releases in Spain, and normally a number of Asian territories, and usually smaller territories. The bigger territories wouldn't, I think almost none of them, I think the one that got a real theatrical release everywhere was Darkness. It was a bigger movie, it had big stars, it was more mainstream, but movies, to be released theatrically, it all has to do with the economics of the picture. And whereas in the 80s, all of these types of movies would get theatrical releases, today they don't. And it's economically determined. In the 80s, the cinemas weren't all monopolized by the studios. You could get in. You could get your movie into a cinema. The internet wasn't around. Video was new, so people were still buying video recorders. The majors didn't believe in video, and so they weren't putting out their product on video, which meant the independents could. We could make all these movies because the majors weren't competing. Then you make a low-budget movie, you could still put it in the movie theater. So Reanimator, From Beyond, Dolls, they all went into the cinema. Well, very quickly towards the end of the 80s, even Society went to cinema. But when you got into the 90s, the studios started competing. And then Blockbuster came in, and the monopolies began, and the cinemas started being owned controlled by big corporations again. So now all of a sudden, yeah, there's tons of screens, but they started finding out that if it's better to if you have a multiplex of 20 screens, you'd play 10 of them, you'd play the latest big movie, because it was about maximizing the first weekend and the advertising. Well, as we've evolved to the point where video downloads and piracy have coupled with all the different electronic entertainments like video gaming and computer downloads and print and YouTube and there's so many things to do for your entertainment that you don't, going to the movie theater has really gone down. Even cable. I mean, I think if you look at these cable series, you can see better horror on cable. And video game horror is scarier than the movies. So if you're a horror fan, you've got a lot of places to go, whereas in the 80s you didn't. You went to the movies. Video didn't have much stuff. So the world has changed. And today, if you're going to release a movie in the theater, you've got to understand, if you make a movie for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, it's going to cost double or triple that to release it theatrically. So the risk is huge. And the movie is playing right next door to a $80 million Hollywood horror movie. Costs the same. So except for festivals, most of these movies, you'd be hard pressed to see them theatrically. So with the Fantastic Factory, yeah, we were at the end of all of that, and I think that a lot of territories put them out theatrically, of course, but the bigger ones didn't, because the bigger ones, the cost of promotion is just too big, and so the economics dictate otherwise. I'm working on amphibious 3D. I moved to Jakarta, Indonesia a few years ago to try to make a label there called Komodo Films. And we began by making an Indonesian language movie with Indonesian directors, what they call a portmanteau, and to get to know the industry there. It's quite undeveloped. And then I wanted to make a series of 3D movies. So last summer, I shot a movie about a giant sea scorpion in the North Sumatra Sea on a fishing platform, and tried to integrate the the sort of supernatural Indonesian Javanese culture with a giant insect. And it's 3D. It was very challenging. It was just really a complete epic story in itself, trying to make that movie. And I'm still finishing it now in Belgium and Netherlands and Finland, trying to get the effects and the sound all finished up. So I hope it turns out pretty good. It was really fun to work in 3D, especially back then. That was a year ago, and it's just changing all the time.